What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and League of Legends patch 10.9 is coming out. It's a pretty short one, so I'm gonna guess 22 minutes in the video. Let's see if we get there. All right, so 10.9 is pretty small, but it's still interesting. So let's keep track of what's going on. We've got 6 sets of buffs, we got 5 sets of nerfs, and ooh, the fun plus Phoenix skins. Alrighty, let's get into the split is ending soon. By the way, you've got like 5 days to get your ranked rewards in for the split, so do that as needed. But here comes some Bard nerfs, and Bard have been getting buffed like off and on for a long time, way back when. People have finally realized this champion is absurdly strong. Bard has had a super high win rate for honestly about a year now. He's one of the champions that I was spamming last season because his win rate was so high. People are getting better at realizing what keystones to use and things like that. So here's another round of Bard nerfs. I think wise to do so. So basically losing some move speed and cooldown on the W and losing some cooldown on the E. We're at a point right now where people are indeed maxing W second. Back in the day it was debatable, but now W second is more common and more powerful. So a cooldown nerf that hits early ranks of E and falls off over time is a bigger nerf now than it is if you're going to max E second. That said, there's maybe a reason to not put points in W as much anymore, since the speed isn't as good and since the cooldown's not as good. You're not going to get as much value out of the ability, but at the end of the day, there's a bit of less utility on this button while having the same amount of healing. So here's the quick data table. Now I want to point out that a move speed change that decays is this nerf is less impactful than it looks. Now certainly the first burst of move speed and honestly how visceral it is, that's going to be felt. You're going to be like, oh wow, I'm not accelerating quite as hard. But worth pointing out that right, this decays down to 25, this decays down to 15. That's less of a difference, right? I mean, imagine a 2% move speed buff versus a 1% move speed buff. It's twice as good and yet irrelevant, right? So the closer we go to 0, the less this matters. But the initial burst of speed, you have about 13% less move speed, right? Instead of going 1.5x, you go 1.3x. That's 13% less move speed. The cooldown's up by 2 seconds. There's obviously no level scaling here at all, but also pretty reasonable cooldown nerf. From my experiences, this is actually pretty meaningful. Getting all the tokens down can take quite a while. In early laning phases, you are a little bit mana constrained, but if you're able to go down and grab some chimes and you want to put down healing packs again, it takes a while to get that second and third healing down. So yeah, this is going to be felt. This is going to be a nerf. As far as the E cooldown is concerned, here is that data table. Again, current Bard max is this last. Theoretically, I could see this changing up. I don't expect it to. Some people will twitch over. I think it will be wrong to do so. So for the vast majority of the game, you are 22% longer cooldown here on this, which honestly can matter. From my experiences playing Bard, you could sometimes say, I'm going to go for a bit of more of aggressive sort of tunnel here, and I can expect to get out because I've got a little bit of CDR through the items I'm buying. It's going to be less likely, right? 4 flat seconds is a pretty big deal. This will be felt as well. Bard will be dying more often. He will save teammates less often. I guess Bard is maybe an it. I'm not sure. Regardless, this is going to be felt, and Bard will drop. And probably get dangerously close to 50%. I think it's barely above 50. I think it's like, I actually shouldn't speculate. I think it's probably like pretty solid, like 52, 53, something like that. And should drop a good like 1.5% here. Next up, Cho'gath gets a rank up incentive on the E on vorpal spikes. Now, what's interesting is vorpal spikes has flat damage in the sense that it cares about his AD. It also cares about max health as well, and so the base damage is not as important as maybe another ability, like say Rupture, where all it is base damage. But I also looked into the ability order of Cho'gath, and his most popular and winningest skill order, even in top lane, where this is kind of aimed, is Q max first. That said, E max first is not that far behind in pick rate, and we may see that pick rate, actually we will likely see that pick rate go up, but also keep in mind that this is not, like maxing E first was not as good as maxing Q first anyway. It's not as good in the first place, and then this will maybe make it catch up, but I'm not sure. So this is in some cases not as big of a buff as you might think, because people aren't maxing this first anyway. But for hoots and haulers, I did this data table as though it was max first anyway, just to like be as generous as possible. And if we're as generous as possible, this ability does 12 more damage, you know, this 82 base damage ability does actually 213 per auto attack. Obviously, that is, again, Cho'gath's base AD. That's the percent health scaling over the top as well. For what it's worth, I mean, yeah, ultimately, this is decent, right? These are still increases of damage, and to be fair, it's 12 more damage 3 times because Vorpal Spike shoots 3 times. It is a bunch of big AoE, so it's 36 damage to the entire minion wave. It helps wave clear. That is all relevant, but I'm not optimistic that this buff is actually that big. Ultimately, just because the best build is Qmax anyway, and I think the delta between Qmax and Emax is larger than this buff, but maybe I'm wrong. Fiddlesticks gets a buff that is mostly aimed at support. In support, it seems to be maxed. It's frequently maxed first, but the stronger build is maxing it second and maxing your Q, like the other builds do. But other lanes max this last, right? So this actually does have quite a lot of value in terms of it is a 1-point wonder in jungle, and this actually has rank incentive in support because they want to, you know, throw down the crowd control. So, okay, what is 5 points per level going to do for a Fiddlesticks support where it is? Wait, did I just do this wrong by a lot? I did this wrong by a lot. Wait, why do I have 30 flat damage here? What did I do here? And why is it so horribly wrong? All right, I screwed up something really badly here, and I don't know how. So it's 20 flat damage on the end of it. That's the math. I don't know what happened here. Let's move on. Gnar! Gnar, I want to point out, by the way, so again, to spend a little bit of time on this, actually. So Fiddlesticks E is commonly maxed first in support, but it's better to max Q first. This will help the E max first build be slightly stronger. It will help it catch up with the Q max first build, which is good to know. Level 13, I mean, even if you're level 8, you're going to get 5 more damage on the ability, whereas it would require level 14 for a jungler to get this. I would argue that level 8 on support is sooner than level 14 on jungle. So even if we don't change skill orders here, this will help support Fiddlesticks, which is a good thing. I'm glad support Fiddlesticks isn't throwing crows at you anymore and is somewhat viable. Good change, Riot. Well done. That was very annoying back in the day. But ultimately, I don't think it changes the ability order. It is a minor damage buff, and minor damage buffs tend to be actually not that bad. So it's, you know, maybe a percent. And actually, this is going to be a bigger, so on Qmax Fiddle, it'll be probably under 1% win rate. On Emax Fiddle, it's probably over 1% win rate. So this is actually be felt a fair bit for support Fiddle, because the common build is going to get buffed by the most. You might see win rate drop because people are going more toward the less powerful build. We'll see what happens. Right, so back onto Gnar. The Gnar Boulder Toss cooldown goes from, you know, 40% to 30%, so that is a reduction of 1/4 of the cooldown. That's pretty solid if you can pick up the Boulder Toss. It's all melee Gnar buffs, by the way. And then crunch damage goes up by a flat 30, which is this. So I managed to not copy it. So what happened is, this is the Gnar E damage buff. I did the Fiddlesticks one, I then didn't copy and paste it, and then overrode it with Gnar. That's what happened. So here's the crunch damage, and it's actually pretty meaningful. Even though crunch has percent health damage on it, the flat 30 really kind of comes through very early on. Also worth noting, this is an ability that is maxed last, so you're really going to actually feel this quite a lot, because it's going to be 1 point for this whole time. And then you can see, like, the rank of incentive is actually quite high, but you want Q and W way more anyway. But yeah, this is actually pretty solid, right? This is a pretty meaningful damage increase. So that your all-ins do 30 more damage, which is meaningful, right? That is absolutely meaningful. Now, again, it's based off the Mega Gnar cooldown. You have to get to Mega Gnar to crunch, but this is a solid damage gain. Yeah, I mean, this is at least 1%, I think, to Gnar. I mean, okay, it's only Mega Gnar, so, like, these are big buffs, but they're only on, like, 1/5 of the time. So maybe it's not 1%, but it might be because Teamfight Gnar cares so much about this. So it's power in the right places where Mega Gnar teamfights and actually takes names. So this could be 1% or so. Karthus loses 10 move speed. What's actually interesting is this is a clear speed nerf. But what's interesting is it is, I would argue a bigger clear speed nerf to low elo than a high elo, where I think he's actually problematic, because high elo players can actually clear the jungle more quickly and more cleanly. Because a skilled Karthus will kite the camps anyway, and jungle monsters already move faster than you, so you're not realistically dodging any less damage off this nerf. I'm going to guess in most cases you're not dodging any more damage. But you're also already kiting the camp to the edge of the tether range when you finish killing it, which means if you're doing a blue buff, you're already next to Gromp. When you're doing Gromp, you're already, in range at least of wolves. When you're done with wolves, you're sitting in mid lane. When you're done with raptors, you're in range of red buff. When you're done with red buff, you're in Q range of Krugs. So you're realistically not losing a lot of clear speed. You're losing, at most 1 second if you're clearing well. This hurts your ability to recall and get back to the jungle. It hurts your ability to go fight for scuttle. It lets people chase you down if they invade you. Now that's meaningful. So ultimately, it doesn't hurt the clear, but that just means it's not a double-bladed sword here against Karthus. It's just a move speed nerf, not a move speed and a clear speed nerf, which is fairly relevant, right? 10 move speed nerf is going to be felt. This guy can be chased down. This guy can't run you down with E as well. He can't walk into Wall of Pain range as easily. This will matter. I'm going to put it at a solid 1% win rate nerf. I don't think they're really doing very big ones here. It's a single change, but I think you will see the Karthus win rate go down. You will not see the pick rate go down, because this is the kind of change that people will look at and be like, oh, that means nothing, but it will affect the win rate of the champion. So this will take time for play rate and ban rate to keep up with the power hit here. Kayn gets a 1 second cooldown buff on the Q, and the damage to monsters now applies to minions, which is pretty meaningful, and the W has a much heavier slow. So here is the Kayn Q. I'm assuming not red Kayn here, so it's just the base flat damage. And the ability to have very good rank up incentive, right? 75 becomes 155, it only doubles in damage, which is why, by the way, you put 3 points in Q and then stop. Which we put out here. So you put 3 points in Q and then stop, but that's enough to obviously make the ability very, very strong. Also keep in mind, Q double hits if you're able to do it, which means his minion damage is up by a crap ton. Instead of doing 150, it's 230 damage to minions with rank 1 Q. So this is a very big deal for lane Kayn. Lane Kayn is almost always red Kayn, so this sort of falls off eventually, but not that it's really that common anyway, but it does mean that when Jungle Kayn comes to gank a lane and clear a wave, he's going to completely evaporate that minion wave. Also, again, 1 second cooldown buff on the Q, very meaningful. That is a huge clear speed buff. Again, it's going to sit 6 becomes 5 for the majority of the mid game. But this is super duper impactful. This is really, 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 really impactful. Massive clear speed buff to the champion. Again, the only clear speed buff is a cooldown. But if you go to a lane to shove the lane out, which I think is good for Kayn to do, to get back into the jungle and power farm some more, he's going to be doing 80 more damage per Q to minions. Well, 40 to 80 if you don't double hit everything. Absolutely huge, definitely a big deal. I didn't actually do the math of the slow hit, but also a good one. I could have, I just didn't. I think this is going to be quite nice. I want to point out that the last few rounds of Kayn changes, it didn't end up buffing the champion. Some of that is because it changed when and how to gank, and so that's some bit of a learning experience for Kayn players. But also, I think some of it is bad Kayn players coming in and playing Kayn. He's actually deceptively a little bit hard to play. But end of the day, still the last sets of changes weren't really buffs. So let's get some real buffs, and these are real buffs. This is going to be really, really nice. Next up is Lissandra getting a pretty subtle cooldown change on the Q. I am glad it's not decimals anymore. I'm always happy to not have fractions of a second on the cooldown. So 10 to 4 becomes 8 to 4, which is a buff for the first 8 levels of the game. This is a wave clear buff to Lissandra's early game. And Lissandra's been getting love tap buffs for a long time, right? They're trying to say, if Lissandra can get back into the edge of pro play to get the occasional pick. Of course, we're not going to see for a while if it's going to happen, because none of the leagues are going to use this patch for playoffs, and MSI is gone, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, this is still a very small buff. This is probably to the tune of under 1%, but it's the kind of buff that helps pro play. So we might see it come through. See you in Summer Split, I guess. Next up, Nami gets rounded down base health and mana. I want to point out that Nami has Obviously not at this point very, very low health, but also somewhat above average armor. I believe she's in the high, I think she's like 29 armor, which is slightly high for a ranged champion. Most supports have high amounts of armor. I really still believe, I wish we saw ranged supports not have absurd armor. They could have 25 like the average ranged champion, and just have the correct amount of health. It does a very small thing, as I do my every bi-weekly rant about base stats. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but I think it's deceptive. Okay, sorry. You can take this as a positive or a negative. I'm taking it as a slight negative because I think it's a little obtuse. Because enchanter supports and all range supports in general have above average armor. They have essentially more regen than other champions, or at least than their other AD carries, but also they are better at receiving healing than AD carries, right? So when you have 29 armor like Nami versus 22 armor like Ezreal, direct healing is roughly 7% more effective on you. Now you might consider that a positive. Here is Nami, here is Sona, here is Soraka, here are these champions that like would like to run Summoner Heal if we could get AD carries to stop running it, and they should. Hey, we have these self-heals on the kit. Wouldn't it be nice if they were more effective on us? I think selfish power is a nice thing. I think enchanters should at least be a little bit self-sufficient, even if they're not killing other people, which they probably shouldn't be. If they're self-sufficient, there is a reason to give them enhanced armor and MR for that reason. But I think if that was true, I would like them to have enhanced MR as well. Like, I think enchanters who can self-heal are the one class in the game who can, I think, realistically be allowed bonus armor and MR, but just being armor sits weird with me. Essentially what this comes down to is this is a champ with 475 health who is more durable against physical damage than Ezreal with 500 health because of the armor difference. And you wouldn't know that without clicking on the target. So if you're like all-inning a champion in lane and you say, Nami's health bar is lower than Ezreal's, we should go for Nami, that's actually wrong at level 1 because of how much her armor is higher. Anyway, small nerf to health to the tune of 14, small nerf to mana to the tune of about 12, small nerf to the passive move speed to the tune of 15. So Nami's a champion with a very high win rate. Also, last I checked, she is one of the highest mastered champions in the game, in that she's top 5 for champions when you sort by how many average games of experience are on this champion when it's played. Nami is top 5. So Nami has an inflated win rate because of Nami experts. I want to point that out real quick, that Nami is in the Riven and Yasuo and Katarina camp of almost only experts play this champion. That said, Nami has roughly the highest win rate of all supports and has for a very long time. So a very small 3 to 1% nerf to health. Want to point out that Nami indeed scales to a very, very low amount of max HP. Her armor goes up to the 90s, which is absurdly high for a ranged champion. Again, this makes her healing better on herself, which is, again, debatably a good thing. So I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but hey, for a picture of the champion, this is what's true about it. Has, about 12 more armor than the average range champion by level 18. Not that you get to 18, but hey, FYI. So the health bar is deceptively low to a fairly minor degree. It's not that big. It's like 5%, right? But here's that data table. There's the mana table. Scales up to under 1100. Okay, sure, no problem. Could have lowered the mana per level if they wanted to. It's not a huge deal. Again, I like anything that goes towards that, but it's super minor. This is not actually that important. And again, there's actually a reason for it to be elevated. I think it's reasonable to do so. That said, I still want templated armor and MR, but whatever. If there's a way to break it, if there's a reason to break it, it would be enchanters. Move speed up by 15 on Surging Tides. So here's a table on this one. As you can see, again, not a very big change rate, 3 to 1%. It's mostly a round down because they're nerfing, which I think is fine. That said, it's enough of a round down that you can feel it slightly. 15 health or 13 health level 1 is actually meaningful. It will matter. You will feel this. But here is basically, depending on how much base move speed the targeting champion has, 325 is the slowest champion of the game. Realistically, without boots. And then 410 is like, it's not quite where Moby's goes to, but it's like Swifties on Master Yi. It gets you to like around there. Roughly. So, yeah, it is about 3 to 4% less move speed when you buff someone. Keep in mind, I believe this has an AP ratio. So this nerf goes, is less of a nerf over time. percentage-wise as you get ability power, which you always do. So yeah, I mean, of moderate importance. You will feel this somewhat. This will exist. This will matter. Ultimately, I'm trying to like figure out how much I really think the 15 health matters, or the 14.3 health matters. Probably a decent amount, to be honest. Probably over 1% win rate drop here. Quinn gets an extra quarter second on blinding assault. I think it's pretty small. I actually don't think this buff means that much, because simply they're either just running away from you the whole time, or they've gotten into melee range and the blind doesn't matter anymore. I think in a lot of cases it's a CC duration that doesn't do anything compared to like a slow duration or a like conventional blind like Teemo duration will sort of more reliably mean more. I think this frequently doesn't matter. It is still a small buff. Great, good job, Quinn. But I think it's gonna be really small in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're gonna land Q on a, you know, I was gonna say Quinn, a Jhin in team fights and then vault off him, and now you're out of range and Jhin can't attack for just a quarter second. That can sometimes happen, but I'm guessing in most cases this doesn't do anything. Next up, Trundle gets a 20-second increase on the R. Trundle is very quickly becoming the most common jungler in competitive, so take a nerf back down to a competitive focused cooldown, which is the ultimate. That said, I still tend to believe that ulti cooldowns tend to not be that important for pro. Just because there's a little bit less action frequently, but that can be wrong. Especially in more aggressive metas, that can be true, where you can kind of just keep trying to punish them. But we'll see. I don't think it's going to mean that much for pro. It's going to mean a little bit for solo queue. I think it's going to be a little bit under 1% nerf. Wukong gets a 3 armor nerf, which is deceptive because, of course, he gets free armor through his passive no matter what. But also gets 10 flat damage off the Q and 5% flat damage off the W. So here's the armor before and after. This is without stacking your passive more than just the base line on enemies. Still scales to 100 armor, which, to be fair, right, and starts at like above 30, which is, to be fair, fairly reasonable for a top lane bruiser, juggernaut, whatever. That's kind of in line for what this kind of class gets. But you're still going to feel this a fair bit. Again, you're going to feel a little bit less as you stack your passive in combat, but you know, a moderate durability nerf against physical, still putting the armor within, I think, a reasonable spot. So that's fine. Here is the 10 flat Q damage. This is assuming you're maxing it last, which is by far the correct build if you're jungling. It's debatable against E if you're top lane, so I just chose to max it second. Maxing first versus maxing second top lane's pretty close. Ultimately, 10 flat damage isn't really going to change your skill order that much, to be honest. It's not going to be a big deal, but you are going to feel this quite a bit. 10 damage is pretty meaningful. As far as the W damage with the percent, there you go. Also about 10% overall in like terms of actual meaningfulness. The ability just does 10% less overall damage. So yeah, I mean, 2 of your abilities do 10% less damage in the early game. One of them does 10% less damage all game. That's going to be really felt, right? This is going to be a pretty meaningful knock to Wukong. Probably over 1%, especially with the 3 armor there as well. This is going to be a pretty meaningful nerf. Wukong will probably still be above 50, but will fall quite a bit here. The final change here is going to be Sanguine Blade. It's 100 gold cheaper, and it has 5 more attack damage, because it's definitely not getting bop at anyone right now. Here you go. There's the table. We've got to, I guess, shrink this down to maybe 180. There you go. We could probably bump to 190. Look at us. Okay, great. So what we've got here is the old efficiency and the new efficiency. Instead of spending 80% of the gold on blood price or whatever, blood pursuit, I think, you're only spending 10% of the gold on blood pursuit, which is quite nice. Again, the 5 AD is worth quite a bit. The cheaper cost is obviously useful. It is actually a little bit awkward to deduce lethality cost, since Serrated Dirt got buffed a while ago. The like purely mathed value of lethality is like 10 gold per point of lethality, which is stupid. Or like 5 gold per point of lethality, which is, I think, just completely fraudulent. So I'm still using 22.5, which is what the old Serrated Dirt gave you, which I think is somewhat reasonable. Maybe it should be a little bit higher, but who knows? It's a derived stat in the first place. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is an item that is still definitely efficient while you have the passive online. And it's realistically at a point where it's gold efficient even without the attack speed. I chose a snapshot of about level 10, which is 50% attack speed. theoretically the 20% scales up from level 1, and you can't have this item at level 1. So in the real world, this item never gives 20% attack speed. It always gives like at least 35. And I chose 50% because whatever, I just picked a number that was somewhere in the middle of that scale. But you know, whatever. It's again, it's gold efficient in any reasonable situation where you buy the item. It was efficient anyway, but it's obviously more so. Yeah, this is a meaningful buff, right? You still need to be soloing for this item to be good, but I think it gets there really, really early on. And yeah, this is a buff that is big enough to be worth buying. Absolutely the case. So that is it for the patch rundown. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate y'all very much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.